So you guys are already experts about concrete and abstract language. Concrete is specific, abstract, there's just lots of room for you to... Oop, where'd it go? Oh no, I'm going all the way back. God. I messed that introduction up. Abstract is that there's room for you to interpret. For our papers, abstract is not our friend. We are not writing song lyrics. We are not writing a political speech. We are trying to communicate information. So being as concrete as possible is the way to go. This is really similar to the last video of like, yeah, don't use language where we can't picture it or where somebody may get a different idea about it. That ends up being horrifically problematic when you're in, let's say, an engineering job, or if you're in medicine and you describe something using abstract language, and then whoever listened, a nurse, an orderly, whatever, hears something different. They thought you meant something different, and that can have catastrophic results. So it's good to practice concrete language in our everyday writing. So here's from the same class. And again, you're going to notice that it is just really boring. So the class's recommendation of friends that have spoken very highly of Professor Banerjee and his intriguing teaching style, along with his great persona as a teacher. The connection he instills in his students is amazing and very fortunate to have around. The past week's experience of this first year seminar, that's the class name, it was great and proved that this course is not an easy one, but an interesting one that is of curiosity to be in. The expectation for this class is very high and the presumption of it being no less than interesting. Again, I forgot this immediately. Like, what is interesting? That's so, like, what's interesting about it? It's an interesting one. Why is it not easy? But it's interesting. Can you give an example of something that happened when they spoke very highly? In what way? What way is this teaching style intriguing? What does this mean to have great persona? Can you give an explanation of what kind of connection he has with his students? What do you mean that it's amazing? What happened this week, which showed you that? So give specifics. It is so much more important to keep your audience listening if you're able to provide these almost visual images, things that they can latch onto. This convinces nobody, and I didn't remember it afterwards. There were a lot of essays from this class that I did remember because they had those visual moments for me, or they had examples, or they used analogies, things like that helped me understand their perspective. But anybody could have submitted this, and it would have worked like for most people. So ways that we can counteract this. One thing to do is avoid qualifiers and use a word that's a little more specific. So anytime we have like really scared, could be terrified, kind of, sort of, individual, specific, definitely, very, actually, generally, really, basically, for all intents and purposes, also a lot, or very is a big one that I've noticed with our class too. We don't need those qualifiers. You can either get rid of them completely, or you can choose a word that's a little more interesting. And you can just find that by Googling, which this guy used a lot. I was also very interested. Where's another one? Show studying this for a stronger, more concrete. I guess it was just that one. Often neglected. Yeah, I think it was just the very interesting there. But a lot of vague language in here. Stronger and concrete understanding. I don't really understand what that means. I tried to make things as specific as I could, but really I would need more of his perspective to completely transform the little paragraph that I wrote. Oh. I did not link things up terrifically well. Where's the other thing I was going for? Ways you can fix this: delete empty words, and as I mentioned with prepositions, things like that. Translate your vague terms into visual and specific terms. If you're unsure how to do that, perhaps revisit my lecture, which was about Hugh Hefner, where I go through how to translate into third person. By translating from first person to third person, you inevitably are going to use more concrete language because you can't depend on things like I feel. And interesting is really subjective. What's interesting for me is totally different from what's interesting for you guys. I guarantee it. And add identifying details. Give examples. You guys did a really nice job in your last paper doing that. A lot of people brought in like Black Lives Matter, or brought in the gender pay gap, like things to show like, look, here's how this thing works in action. Those are so helpful for our brain. I already talked about that. Okay. Unnecessary details and repetition. a lot of it's repetition of words, sometimes it's repetition of ideas. So this was one in a paper I recently graded that made me lol. So before the discoveries of Charles Darwin, pre-Darwinism theories, Darwinian theories existed about how evolution occurred or took place, but mostly all of them are deemed incorrect after Darwin's discoveries. I read that, and there's just this part about theories existed about how evolution occurred or took place. That's the same thing. And so this registers, sometimes we don't realize we're doing this, but a lot of times we're doing it trying to take up space. So no need to give another synonym for something. We can just keep those out of there. So this person, there was just like too much stuff in it that we didn't really need. He had this narrative. I started last semester. I enrolled in the College of Business, but I wasn't completely sure what my major would be. After, I decided I want to be an entrepreneur and build my own business. 4 classes at Loyola Marymount University will give me the understanding of different cultures and beliefs. Last semester, he said, around October 1st, I was reading an article about Indians. Now their population has grown substantially in the United States. When I was searching for my first year, there's just so much stuff, which if this article was the thing that really drove him to think about, the Indian diaspora and taking this class, he could start this out explaining what's this article, where did he find it, what was so interesting about it, especially as a business major, what's so interesting about it. That would have made a lot of sense and been interesting to hear from his perspective. Instead, we just have like all these details about what religions you've learned about. That's not really helpful answering our question. You don't have to tell us the word diaspora was unfamiliar to you. I learned this as a definition. I'm not trying to mock this at all. You could look at any of my work and find the same kind of crap. This reads to me as something that wasn't really edited very well and could be so much more effective if we cut out some of this unnecessary stuff. In this other one, I started looking up different courses that are taught and reading about their descriptions. I first placed a certain time frame in which I would take my course. I looked at different subjects taught by many professors. That's just taking time. So for you guys, look at your context. And so I know that I've talked about how context is like a great place for you to examine when you are trying to make your paper longer, but there is such thing as adding like way too much summary. So look and see did I add context that isn't necessary for just understanding this quote. It's good to let the reader know what you're working with and where the quote came from and what it's referring to, but we should really only have like a sentence of context. Anything beyond that is just summarizing stuff. So I know a couple people used some of Blind Spot's, what was it? Some quotes from there. In the last paper, would bring up an experiment and go through the experiment. So if you want to cover something longer than that, that's okay. But you're going to want to make sure that you analyze it really, really well, or even paraphrase it and put it in your own language. Last one is choppy sentences. So I wrote this on several people's papers, but sorry, that keeps going off. One of the best ways that you can cut clutter is to look at your sentences, find the short ones, and combine them if they have a similar subject. Naturally, you will have to cut out some of those little prepositional words. And so especially look for when you see 2 words in the same, in sentences that are the same word in sentences that are next to each other, So something like this, which I'm just going to say this is not a very good, example of writing. It's very, very general. There's obviously a lot of prepositions, but look specifically at the sentence length. So my expectations for the class is that it will be an overall fun experience. The content about the Indian diaspora, which I have limited knowledge about, I will be able to learn new information in a comfortable environment. I expect the class to be challenging. It will require hard work for me outside of class. I know I'll have to read and write a fair amount of text. Finally, I also expect to engage in group discussions and regularly work, as I know that Professor Banerjee loves teaching his students to work together instead of individually. So things like this, I expect the class to be challenging. It will require hard work. Then he goes on to talk about the hard work. We could easily, even though I would totally rewrite this and explain some of the ways it's going to be hard and what kind of work is required, you could say, I expect the class to be challenging and it will require hard work, and I'll have to read and write a lot of fair amount of text. it's hard to do if someone else is writing, and I'll have to read and write a lot, outside of class. So it will require me to read and write outside of class. We can combine this thing, get rid of a lot of the language, and we, again, haven't lost any meaning. So I think that's really the important takeaway here, is that when you're cutting clutter, you do not lose meaning. It's like pruning a tree. I grew up with avocado trees, and it used to devastate me that I had to cut their beautiful leaves, sometimes to the stump, but that's what you have to do to get them to grow back for the next season. But you're also able to just see the fruit a little bit better too when you are getting rid of some of the leaves. So think of it in that terms. That's my analogy, my metaphor to use, or I guess that was a simile. But go forth and review your papers, see what your individual issues are. Maybe you're really awesome with your prepositions, but maybe you just have those weird cluttery phrases that you could simplify. Maybe you have a lot of short sentences that are kind of like these staccato notes when you read them. It doesn't flow like regular conversation. The only thing I'm going to ask you to do for this writing lab is to find a section from your paper, from your last paper, Essay 1, that you think is kind of cluttery. And some of you are lucky that I've marked these, and then explain how you would change it, or take one sentence and revise it. So that's it. That's all I want you to do. I want you guys to focus more on your papers. I'll give you credit for just identifying and going through one area of revision. So again, just one sentence or one section, one small section that you'll isolate from essay number 1. And you'll post that and explain how you would revise it to make it a little less cluttery.